Hello and welcome to my first podcast. My name's Allie, and today we're going to talk about the news that isn't quite making the news, how it's able to do that, why that matters to you and me as people. So pretty much how it starts is that there's 6 companies that own 90% of our country's media services, and the largest one is Comcast, with about $150 billion in revenue, followed by Disney with about half that. And then all the following ones have a little bit less each time. I was surprised when I was doing my research I thought Disney would have the most brands, but they actually don't even come close to Comcast, which just goes to show how many different brands each of these companies has and how they're able to disguise themselves in plain sight. Most people not even having ever heard of News Corp, maybe Comcast, maybe National Amusement. And then the one that surprised me that is now on the list is Sony. I hadn't realized that they had bought so many media companies. But the interesting thing is that there's these 6 that own 90% of the media. And when we think of media, a lot of times people think of it in the context as like just news media or I don't really know. People just kind of have a general understanding of it. But when you realize that this 90% is actually, it's actually 90% of everything you see on TV, in movies, and in music. And those 3 things alone make up a large portion of your celebrities. So when it funnels down, a lot of your celebrities, your actors, actresses, musicians, all of their managers, their publishers, producers, everybody all funnels back up to these 6 corporations. And then surprisingly, I didn't know this until I was just researching it, but video games are included. Their brands fall under these categories as well. And so then when you take an even closer look at it and you think about it, so we've got AT&T that just bought out Time Warner. So now we're looking at not only do these companies own the media, they own the internet, they own your phone plans. So they own 90% of the media. And then between the internet and the phones, they have all of this extra access to your data beyond just what you see here. So they influence what you see, and they know what you're exposed to from that data that they can collect on you. So not only are they doing this online and with your suggested watches and stuff, but then they also control what advertisements are able to be played on certain channels or that you're exposed to on their websites, on the internet, everywhere. So they're able to use the data to influence, know what you watch, know how you watch it, what the reasons are you watch it for. There's tons and tons that goes into the marketing and psychology of this. And then all these 6 companies can funnel down what you're learning and what is being sold to you, both from a societal and how you think standpoint, but also in a quite literal what you buy, how much you buy, which is fine, but then when you start to think of that in terms of like food and stuff, they're able to alter it so that you don't have as healthy of a diet as you might like, and different things like that. So the power that and the money and the influence that these 6 companies have is absolutely outrageous. And then there's probably thousands and thousands of little companies that make up the last 10%. And that's even including me and my tiny webpage. So a lot of times when people are talking about like the fake news, it's really not just the news, like how many people besides me just sit at home and watch the news for fun. Like, not that big of a percentage of the population does that. So when we're talking about fake news, we're talking about the fake media and the story that is sold to you, and everything that you watch has to be approved by these companies. So they're able to market their agenda differently and slide it into different platforms in different ways. And when we're talking about the news, they don't have your intentions in mind, as we've learned this week. They have each other's intentions in mind, and the power, the money, the control, and the influence that they have over you and I and the population as a whole. So it's important to realize that fake news is really fake media. And it's important to realize that fake, the official dictionary definition, because Google will try to change up definitions on you. So the legitimate denotation of fake is something that is not true, not real, or not genuine, or a worthless imitation passed off as genuine, which this week we are certainly realizing that journalism is not much more than an imitation of genuine information. So, like, one more thing. So, with all of this, all of these companies, each of these 6 have like thousands of companies. And so that leaves us with the illusion of choice, not having actual choice. So when we're listening to our music, we have 1,000 radio stations, we've got Spotify, we can stream, we have iTunes, we have hundreds of musicians at every level, and you're like, oh wow, like 2019, we have so many different choices out there. But when you realize how many record labels, each of these companies probably owns like 20 to 30 record labels by themselves, and not even to mention a lot of what you hear on the radio is going to be coming from just a handful of these producers and labels. And the same thing goes with movies. They have all of these different brands, and Disney has Marvel and Disney and Pixar and Nature and all of these tiny little Miramax. We'll talk about that later. All of these tiny little what are they called? Like movie producing, film creating, whatever, companies under all of these different names. So it seems like there's a lot of variety where we're getting our information from. But in reality, they all filter back up to these 6 companies, giving us not real choice, but the illusion of choice. And the same thing happens with our news, as we're seeing a lot of, like, even the news story that we're going to get to from ABC this week, when it broke, most of the companies owned by, or the news stations owned by these companies, were all saying the same story, all kind of just blaming the girl, blaming the executives, blaming the whistleblower. No one really jumped the gun and decided to acknowledge the problem. And so we see that even though they present their ideas differently, they tend to kind of stay along the same course and keep the narrative together. And so this little connection that they have brings the idea that they are too big to fail, which pretty much means that they've started out slowly over time. In the 1900s, there were clearly more companies, less ownership. The wealth was a little bit more spread out per se, a little bit more integrity, and slowly, these big companies just began buying out the smaller companies. Slowly, people didn't notice, kept the same brand names, did it subtly, did it innocently, until they've reached the point now where they're too big to fail. These companies, all of their profits put together, according to the website that I got this data from, the Six, that I'll put the link to that under the video, but according to them, they would be the 26th or 27th largest country in the world, just based off of the profits of these six countries, which is insane. And another website that I'll also put the link to, they go into a little bit more, it's a little bit outdated. Some of the companies that they refer to and the data they have is a little bit outdated, but they do a really good job of driving the numbers and the how much money and impact this actually has on our society, home. And according to that website or Business Insider article, they could buy every single NFL team 4 or 5 times, pay for the 2008 or 2009 recession bailout 10 times over. These companies have so much more influence and power and money than our government that it's not even funny. And so that is why we see them always protecting themselves, and lately, as they've had more pressure put on them, doing some sketchy stuff. So today we're going to look at it through the lens of Walt Disney, because they're one of the biggest, second biggest to be exact. They're one of the dirtiest, not to say they're definitely all dirty, but with how many kids labels and how good of a reputation Disney somehow still has as a brand, it's a little bit crazy. And they've made it really obvious this week what they're doing, where their standards lie, and frankly they've really pissed me off. And so we're going to look at all these ideas here through the lens of Walt Disney. So, for starters, just a couple little fun facts. Walt Disney actually, in the logo, has 3 6s. And clearly my logo's not perfect, I'm not super artsy, but you can go double check that for yourself. They've got the 6, 6, and the 6. And yeah, you could just say that's just scribbles, but then it gets even weirder. When you get down here and you look at the actual children's Disney's brand, you look at Mickey, and then they have the little swoop there on the Y. When you turn it upside down, it spells wicked. Yeah. There's on the internet you can find pictures that prove it better than me, but that's kind of pretty much the point. When you mirror it upside down, it says wicked. And this all sounds completely like conspiracy, but the more we go into the stuff and what they're doing, the more, I guess, eerie this becomes. So we'll start out talking about the basic Disney Channel, Disney movies kind of themes, and what kind of issues come up there. So the biggest one that is kind of well known, kind of joked about, kind of not really acknowledged, is that in Hollywood as a whole, but especially in the Disney children's realm, there's a lot of pedophilia and sex trafficking and a lot of just sketchy things happening with minors. And I'm going to cheat a little bit here because frankly I didn't want to memorize all of this information on disgusting human beings that I don't care to know about, but feel the need that we need to share it, acknowledge it, and deal with it as a society. So that starts with education. So just a couple examples of the pedophiles that Disney has willingly or knowingly hired or left on even though they knew allegations were going on, or just things of that nature. First of all, if you go to Google it like I did this morning, which is probably the fourth or fifth time I've Googled like similar searches, just because like from trying to explain it to people or like doing research myself or trying to prove it, like, hey, like Disney is pretty messed up and no one talks about it. Like, we'll get outraged over like these just small, relatively small stories, and then nothing ever becomes of these, even though they're all clearly connected and connected to not only to Disney, but like similar pedophile trafficking rings that we'll talk about in a bit. But one of the first ones that I thought was interesting was a guy named Brian Peck. His story was interesting because he was an actor, and he was hired within a year after he had literally just gotten out of jail for like child pedophilia, and then gone to jail, gets out, gets his background check, and Disney hires him for a show where he'll be on with kids. That just to me was mind-blowing. Another one, there's a man named Victor Salva who, I guess in the 80s or 90s, I didn't write it down, 70s or 80s actually, like sexually abused a child while he was the director on set and the child was an actor. The movie was a Disney film, and then it came out and he was continued to be allowed to work with Disney and Disney related companies, brands. And then another one, this one was recent, Stoney Westmoreland was an actor, and he was playing the grandfather on so it was a very recent Disney Channel show. Yeah, I didn't write that down. But it's literally still airs. It's like Alvin or Addin or something. I don't know. But yeah, they did end up firing him when the story came out. But again, it doesn't show up on the internet anymore. So there's about, if you Google just generally, because you might be asking, well then, how did you find this? How do you know this? So if you do a general search query of like sexual abuse and Disney or Disney executives, pedophile charges, things like that, you'll pretty much get, I went through about 10 pages of Bing, about 5 pages of Google, and you will get about pretty much, there was 3 results that they kept recycling through all of these pages, writing it differently, posting a bunch of articles that look almost the same from the headlines, contain the same information, all are citing each other. One was recently, in October, there was these 2 Disney employees, what were their names? One was a custodian and the other one was a guest experience manager, and they both recently have been charged with, what were they charged with? One of them was, like, got caught from an undercover person trying to meet up with a child, and the other one had child pornography on his laptop, but both admitted that they have had issues for about 2 decades each, including the one that's worked at Disney for 15 years. There's a whole list of minor people here who have been named, I say thrown under the rug. Which brings me to the other thing that comes up, is an article from 2014 that's just been regurgitated throughout the internet, that says that there's been 35 Disney employees over the last 10 years have been accused of different abuse charges related to minors of varying degrees. But ironically enough, none of the actors are mentioned, none of the managers are mentioned, none of the executives are mentioned, which we're about to get to some of the bigger names here in a second. It's all the little guys. It's that was just a ride repair manager, that was just a character actor, custodian, gift shop manager, all of these security, that one freaked me out. all of these like petty little people that they blame it on. Well, it's statistically, when you hire 300,000 people, you're going to get people like this. But the article, ironically, doesn't mention any of the executives. So even though there's at least a dozen that you can just find on the internet, I posted a thread to Twitter with everyone that I was able to find from, honestly, just the past couple years. The rest of the internet is like buried. All of the people that worked for Disney, and I was especially looking for the higher ups that were committing crimes, and the one that they like to throw under the bus, I don't know what this guy did, and they've honestly talked about it to the point where I'm like, if any of them aren't legit, it's this guy, because usually if they put something on the internet 100,000 times, they're covering up for something or someone else. But actually, I'm not even going to stick up with them. So this freak, John Healy, was apparently the executive director of music publishing, and he was convicted with 3 counts, like 3 different underage girls over 4+ years, and it was a continuous, ongoing thing, not 3 separate incidents, 3 separate girls, and he hasn't been charged for this yet, but I'm pretty sure they're still looking into it. He's also been connected to a legitimate organized pedophile ring, so he's connecting it to his buddies, and when you're that high up in Disney, and it seems to be a company-wide trend, what are the odds that there's not some other names in there that are missing, that they haven't found yet, or that we just haven't been told? So that guy's pretty up there. We've got Michael Laney, was a previous vice president of Disney. We've got David Newman, another exec. Garth Ancier, another executive. And then Harvey Weinstein, that's a name that has made its way into the news for his sexual assault allegations from not just girls, and not just through his work with Disney, but with women of all ages, just like a creepy dude to work with in general. So we've been hearing not a lot has happened, but there's a lot of evidence out there that says this is not a good dude. And Weinstein and his brother, their big connection to Disney was that they own one of the movie, I don't know why I can't think of that word. They make movies, I don't know. And their company is called Miramax, and Disney has owned that company from 93 to 2010, and a lot of the allegations came during that time, so he's pretty tied into Disney. Keith Thomas, that guy was Jordan Pruitt's manager, and she was a young Disney child star in the recent years, and I mean, you can look more into that, but she talked about how pretty much he had tricked her into an abusive relationship as a minor, and the stuff that he did and told her she needed to do, or threatened her, not just like with her career, but her safety and stuff, is insane. And then about the same time, Bella Thorne was on Disney Channel too, and she's been speaking out recently and telling her story, and has written in her book about how she was sexually abused between the ages of 6 and 4. Oh, sorry. So these are the kid whistleblowers that no one listens to. And she was pretty much saying how everyone knew it was going on. There wasn't really anything she could do in her power to stop it, and it was just like a normalized thing that like no one helped her deal with. Like she said, even as she was getting on bigger shows, like she was the star of Shake It Up and all that stuff, even as she was breaking into the more Hollywood side and getting more attention, people still weren't acknowledging the stuff that she was going through, and that was a really common thing that I found with all of the kids that pretty much eventually ended up speaking up. Fortunately, but unfortunately a lot of times they're not taken seriously. But when they do speak up, they often say that the person who was doing it was not the only one that knew it was going on. A lot of people know about it, and it seems to just be, even one of the kids, I forget his name, Corey, he wrote a book too and did a documentary on how he and his other child actor friend were trafficked through rings and stuff as they were rising to fame. He even said, we'll get to this later too, but that, said it on The View, that, that it's just like a normal, like, thing in that industry. Like, he was telling audience members, like, they should not send their kids, or, like, they shouldn't try to get their kids to get famous and into acting in Hollywood, because they run a legitimate risk of being sexually abused and trafficked throughout these elite systems. And then finally, we'll move on from Disney on to, like, this is just the Kid Disney brand. We're going to move on to some of their other brands. But the big connection this week is, even without their connections to ABC and ABC having this story, it becomes more interesting because Disney is directly related to Jeffrey Epstein, because the Disney Cruise Line, of all things, stopped at Little St. James Island, which is also known as Jeffrey Epstein's Island, aka Pedo Island. And so the thing about Little St. James is first of all, that's the island where he's got his temple, which there's been a lot of allegations of different satanic rituals and stuff going on there. That's the island that all of the flight logs are logged to, I believe, maybe not. But the Lolita Express, pretty much most of its flights go to and from Little St. James Island, and that's the one that has been making the making the new media news. And there's been a lot of names of different celebrities, different government people, not just in our government, but governments around the world, the royal family. A lot of people with a lot of money and a lot of bad intentions have taken the Lolita Express to Little St. James Island. And knowing that the island has underground tunnels just like Disneyland does, there's a lot of creepy stuff that goes on. The kids, so the boat stops at Little St. James. You can get off, walk around the tourist part of the island, I guess, and then they have like snorkeling and stuff. So they make a whole day of stopping at Jeffrey Epstein's Island. And this company has had the audacity not to even speak a word of him since his arrest, since his first allegations were made against him, since his trial, his death, and have not even said a word since ABC got caught covering up the story. But again, we'll get to that in a minute. So the first thing about Disney that pissed me off this month, week, I don't know, very short amount of time, was ESPN. So Disney, one of the big companies that they own is ESPN. They own a majority of it, all of their channels, which would be their streaming. They've got connections to every sport, to all the athletes. So we've got the kids here, kids and parents and family on ESPN and ABC Family. They've got the news, they've got the History Channel. They are covering all kinds of people with these. They're reaching all kinds of markets with their different brands. And so ESPN, while not directly guilty, being the primary sports host, I guess, is very, very connected with the NBA, especially when it comes to game streaming and international deals. They're one of the United States' biggest sports companies. So, I guess more importantly, let's start with what was the big fuss in the first place. So, as I'm sure you guys have heard about by now, the protests in Hong Kong are now in their 7th or 8th month. They started in March, and pretty much there's just hundreds and thousands of people who have been protesting pretty much every weekend. A lot of people are out there on a daily basis, and they're pretty much protesting because they don't want to become a part of China. Like, China's doesn't look like that. But if that's China, Hong Kong's attached in the bottom right, here. But currently they're kind of their own. They kind of have their own government and control and a little bit of separation from China. But China kind of has this overbearing presence because while they're allowed to be an independent state now, about 20 or 30 years ago, they got into a 50-year contract with China that says pretty much at the end of this, we'll renegotiate, but it's been made clear that China fully intends on taking Hong Kong and making it a part of mainland China. And the people are not happy about that because they don't like the Chinese government, they don't like the way their people are treated, and frankly, China does not have a lot of the freedoms that we take for granted today, which a lot of people don't realize because China's such a big and populous and economically successful country that a lot of times, and with our media won't tell you, they don't cover and they try to squash anything bad that comes from China so that we can keep this pretty much abusive relationship going on, not only between our country's governments, but the people in general, because whether you know it or not, we are responsible for the abuses that the Chinese people are taking because of the way that we've allowed our companies to go in there and help their governments abuse the systems. And then pretty much a lot of our products are made in China, even some that say made in Italy, they're still actually coming from China, or things that are made in America might be 10, the last 10% comes from here and 90% of it comes from there. A lot of even small businesses have admitted that they can't do a lot of what they do without our Chinese imports, which is why the trade deal is so big, not just in terms of our power and the money we were losing, but in terms of helping relieve some of the pressure of not only the people in Hong Kong, but especially the people in China who their government has been taking advantage of for a long time. And so when I say that, we're going to talk about China now because the thought of being forced to become part of China is a big reason that these people are protesting. And some of the reasons for protest overlap in terms of the Hong Kong law, for example. In neither Hong Kong nor China do you have the right to protest, to gather, and to go against what not even go against, but express your concerns or your opposing views of what your country has to do. And our First Amendment guarantees us that right. We always have the right to protest. We have the right to demand them to overturn certain laws. I mean, you obviously have to go from local to state to federal, and it's a big ordeal, and most people don't pay enough attention or care enough to do that. But it is something that our First Amendment guarantees us. So they don't have the right to protest. And then in China, I'm not sure about Hong Kong, but this is just an example of how they treat their people. So, all right, backtrack. So China is a democracy. On paper, It looks very similar to the United States in terms of how our government is set up. They have a legislative branch, executive branch, a judicial branch, but instead of ours being here and the military falling under them, they just have a democracy with a fourth sector. The military is its own independently operating and controlling asset of the government. And so that's a little bit different. But we all know China is a communist country. It acts like one, walks like one, talks like one, but it's technically called a democracy because they have the system that they have, but it's not because every single position is filled by the Communist Party of China, it's the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, but yeah, that's it. So all of the people in politics are from that party, and they've pretty much put the people in a situation where there's not really a way to get any other person enough power, momentum, and through the gross weeds that their government has sown for them to be able to get anyone else in there, as well as the communist part of China, the leader of the Communist Party, Communist Party of China, we're going to go with that, the CCP. They have a couple seats that they're guaranteed, and they, sometime in the middle or early 1900s, China rewrote their constitution, and they slid in a lot of verbiage that, again, even though it's a democracy, because of the way they rewrote their constitution, their people were pretty much tricked into becoming essentially a communist country because of those details. And so, additionally, I don't know if they technically have capitalism or some weird variation of it, but it's not really capitalism because every single company that they have has to have a government and or military member in like their high ranks, like overseeing what they do, making sure they're compliant, aka doing what the government wants. So for example, another First Amendment right that we're guaranteed here is freedom of the press. So even though we have all this bullshit owning 90% of it, and then there's like me over here just making a YouTube video that'll probably get categorized as a conspiracy theory, theoretically I should not be able to go to jail for what I'm doing, fingers crossed. But in China, it's not remotely legal to publish news or anything that's not approved by the government. So like where I'm making my webpage, if I wrote the same articles and I was in China or our government operated like China, and instead of posting them online where there's a trail, I started like handing them out to people and like this underground network, or just like sliding them under people's doors or giving them just to friends and family. If you get caught spreading news and stuff that goes against the government's narrative or their propaganda, you literally will and can and will go to jail just for writing something that could be 100% factual, like happened to you or whatever. Like you will go to jail for trying to make any kind of news that does not have the Communist Party's approval. Another First Amendment right that they do not have, they technically I think have it, is freedom of religion. So for all of these things, on top of all of that, they have awful working conditions, sweatshops, terrible pay, terrible hours, terrible, like people are being exposed to chemicals they shouldn't be, radiation they shouldn't be, they're not properly equipped, and they're making like $350 a month to work like 12 hour shifts, in these awful conditions. But even worse than that is the people who are not even getting paid. So they have these things called labor camps or re-education camps, or it's just jail. Whatever they call it, they have 100 different names for it, but pretty much it's just modern day slavery. There's no other way to say it. So people for any of the petty crimes I mentioned before, someone who gets caught protesting, publishing papers, or being the wrong religion. 50% of the people in the re-education facilities are there for practicing one religion called Falun Gong, and it's pretty much like a spiritual, meditative, self-healing, self-reflection religion. Pretty very, very harmless. Absolutely no groupthink. It's actually very good for you, which is why the government hates it so much, because it was starting to make people wake up and think for themselves, and that made them very unhappy. So about 50% of people in these facilities are in there because of their religious beliefs. That doesn't even include Christians and Muslims and people who are there not so much because of religion, but because of race. Like, they literally have them in these concentration camps. Like, it's exactly like Nazi Germany. You can look it up. You can see the kind of... So then they not only make them work in worse conditions than the people who are working in sweatshops for Nike, LeBron, NBA, ESPN, but they literally are enslaving people, and our country won't tell us about it so that we can't get pissed about it, and their country won't let them say anything, or else they'll just end up in the camp, and pretty much it's straight government oppression, from not only from their country but from us for letting it happen. Like the kind of stuff that they do to the people in the camps. So they not only work them, but they force them to go through re-education classes to become better citizens. And in terms of the Falun Gong practitioners, I watched a documentary on it, and they'll literally will strap them to beds, like hanging, like hands and feet tied in the air, won't feed them for days. They'll electrocute them, like sting them with these little electric shockers, and physically abuse them, sexually abuse the women. I've read a lot recently about how the women in these re-education facilities are being sexually abused until they conform, or even beyond when they conform, just until their sentencing is up. And all of this is happening, and the people in our country are too worried about people coming in over the border and being held in a normal American jail facility, and they're calling that concentration camps, even though a legitimate law has been broken, and they're there to be held and sent back or crossed over. But they're also doing that to protect those people, because a lot of those people, we don't get into this a lot today, but you can read up on it for yourself, but a huge reason that the families are separated at the border is because like 2/3 of them aren't actually real families. It's a handler, a woman that he is renting, and a child that he's bought or is going to be renting out to other people, both the elites and like smaller scale different labor things, both sex trafficking and labor trafficking. Just human trafficking in general is a big reason that we need to stop people from coming in. It's not, I mean, yes, there's points about our money, about our safety and stuff, but like quite frankly, the things that are happening to a lot of the people who are trying to come over is awful and twisted and all part of this. And so we're doing what we can to stop the human trafficking and labor trafficking in the United States. Meanwhile, communist China is literally running 21st century concentration camps for pretty much people violating every single First Amendment right that we're guaranteed as a country. And over just some petty bullshit on the internet and on Twitter. People are like, get rid of the First Amendment. Blah. Which brings us to the Second Amendment. So when the amendments were written, we've been in the United States for quite a while trying to get, the whole reason a lot of people came here in the first place was they came from various countries, but it was during the time there was people trying to escape the Spanish Inquisition. There was people trying to escape Great Britain, where the Protestant I don't remember if it was the Protestant church or the Catholic church, but the church and state had become too powerful together and were taking advantage of all of its citizens and making people do crazy stuff. And pretty much a lot of the Europeans who risked their lives to come to the United States came here because they were falling under these older forms of tyrannical governments. And while they're not as overt and obvious as they were back then, a lot of that is still happening today, which is why we're seeing so much pressure in the news and in the media and in the entertainment media, all the people who are just funny and like to give their opinion and whatever. All of them are putting a lot of pressure on taking away the amendments. Hillary Clinton literally, I probably shouldn't have said her name, but that lady literally tweeted that we should take the 18th century Constitution and use a 19th century paper shredder on it. Like, literally, overtly does not want anything to do with the Constitution or the Bill of Rights, because it is the only thing that separates us as the people, because in our country, the kind of fourth arm of the government, the most important arm, is the people. Like, the people have all of these rights that, unless we give them to them, like, they cannot take from us. And so in terms of Hong Kong and how that relates to the Second Amendment, not only are they not allowed to protest, but they're about to, there's all of this internal conflict within Hong Kong itself, and the military, like I said, is part of the government. So the military is getting very violent with these protesters. I've seen videos of officers just shooting crowds because they're there, or like shooting a 12-year-old like point blank, and not in the way where sometimes like a one story gets changed and like blown out of proportion here, but it's like these people, all they want in Hong Kong is the freedom, the exact freedom that we take advantage of in the United States. Not everybody, but a lot of us are taking advantage of every single day. They won't show you this on the media either. They don't even want you to know what's going on. Like, when's the last time you heard about like Hong Kong or Stand With Hong Kong, whatever? Probably haven't heard anything about it since the whole shit went down with the NBA. But it's still happening all the time, and they're singing our national anthem, they're waving our flag. Like, these people understand what it's like to have a genuinely tyrannical and oppressive government, and all they want is everything that we in the United States are so close to just throwing away, because people aren't thinking logically, and they're getting too emotionally involved in things and not looking at things objectively, and they're just letting these people who are more powerful than our government, which our government is corrupt, was corrupt. We're listening to these people and letting them fill our brains from literally every single angle, and we're about to walk ourselves right into what's going on over here. And that's being led and steamrolled by the NBA. It's happening in most sports these days, some more than others. The NBA is really bad. So what happened, to bring it back, so there was a manager or a head coach of, I believe it was the Rockets. They simply tweeted, standing with Hong Kong, like, prayers for you, hope you get your freedom. It was one sentence, short, sweet, to the point, simply, like, we stand with you, we support you. And then he had to delete it. And then all of a sudden, a lot of players were talking about it, saying, oh, he was out of line for saying it, or other ones were like tiptoeing the line, like Steve Kerr, Steph Curry, the Warriors head coach. He was on camera and they asked him about it, and he goes on for like 3 minutes about how he's not educated enough to make an opinion, and it's just crazy what they're going through, and he's gonna look into it. And a lot of people are like all of a sudden they're playing the politically correct card, and saying, and LeBron is getting interviewed saying like, hey, we're athletes, we're not government people, leave that to the government, like, you shouldn't be asking athletes to talk about this, even though for the last 4, 5, 6, 50 years, like, professional athletes from every sport, every level, they'll chime in on anything they don't know about, whether it's politics or like social issues. Like, a lot of these people, even if they grew up in different backgrounds, once they get that rich and are caught up in all this shit and have money, dirty money coming in from all this shit, they're so out of touch, and they'll talk about different problems and issues here in the United States to try to get us to have one opinion or the other. I mean, there is a little bit of a variety, but a lot of it is not coming from the right place. And now all of a sudden, Hong Kong, these people don't have their basic freedoms, like nothing. Like, they're pretty much, a lot of them are enslaved, and the government is just controlling every aspect of their life. And all of a sudden, LeBron is Mr. politically correct. Oh, why are you asking me, an athlete, to make a political statement? And then 3 days later, during the national anthem, just walks around the court like acting like it's not happening, throwing his own little I'm LeBron parade, and just was very disrespectful, not only to the country, not only to the flag and to the person who was singing. Like, everyone was just looking at him like, what are you doing? Like, he's walking behind the bench up towards the person singing. Like, he just made it all about him. He wasn't even seemingly protesting anything. But the whole reason I think they were silenced was because, A, China does not want our people to know about Hong Kong, what's really going on, because they do not want them to know, they do not want us to know what's happening in China, how their people are being treated. And many of these people up here don't want you to know, because they don't want us to learn from or appreciate or start making comparisons between us and them. Because really, if you look at our recent history, while we're kind of at two extremes right now, there's a lot of correlations that are starting to emerge between our countries as we were becoming more financially dependent on one another. It was a very toxic relationship for both parties. So pretty much a lot of the money coming from up here, especially coming from ESPN, because China threatened to cut a lot of our streaming deals, and in China, the NBA is probably one of the most watched American sports, so yes, that is a big market, and there's a lot of people who want to make the business argument, not the social argument, which sometimes sort of makes sense, but in this case, you're literally saying, like, this whole country, which yes, it's large, but that money right there is more important to you than, like, all of the lives of those people. And like, I don't know. And that to me, when a company, all of these countries are very internationally woven. Same thing with Google, Twitter, Facebook, all of those, they aren't media, but they're platforms, social platforms or search platforms, and all of them work very closely with these guys. In China, I think Google is more loyal to China than they are to the United States, which would be a whole other episode. But I think that to me just told me where Disney and ESPN's loyalties lie and where their standards are. So if that wasn't enough for Disney to piss me off this month, earlier this week we had a little incident about Jeffrey Epstein made it back in the news again, finally. A lot's been known about this guy. So just a little brief background on him. Again, it would be a whole another series just to talk about Epstein and how messed up he is. But pretty much Epstein is a financier. He made all of his money helping the rich, powerful individuals, millionaires, billion-dollar companies, all of that, move a lot of their money and assets offshore or reorganize their assets to make sure that they paid the least amount of taxes possible, which pretty much means putting it in slush funds, putting it in islands, moving manufacturing to other companies. Pretty much his whole job is already anti-America in and of itself. And then he goes on, he makes his money. So then he also has some issues. One of the companies actually that he aligned himself with very early on in the 80s when he was getting started out was Victoria's Secret. So there's a lot of things that happen between him and Les Wexner, which is the CEO, founder, whatever, of Victoria's Secret. A lot of ties there, a lot of ties with politicians. We now have a lot of information since the raid, but it was honestly pretty easy to find if you're looking for it. It was probably easier to find if you were looking for it before the raids happened, and then once the media got a hold of it, all Google, Twitter, everything started suppressing that information so that people like us couldn't go and find it, which is why it makes it hard to find a lot of this stuff, even though there's evidence and it's out there. So Epstein trafficked girls. He had a very large taste for underage girls. He and people close to him have admitted it. He's had allegations against him. Many of them have been bought off. In 2006 or 2008, he finally got slammed with one. But what should have been a life sentence for you or me or any regular person ended up being like 8 months in jail and 12 months of parole, where it was later found out that while he was on parole, he was abusing more kids while he was supposed to be at work. So we've got little sub thing. We've got Epstein is like, they call him the honeycomb, and then his partner in crime is Ghislaine, is what we call her, Maxwell. So they were kind of butt buddies, kind of both just freaks. And a lot of the kids will say, they call them massages, and we're going to stick with that term because it's a lot less gross than what actually goes on. But fill in the blanks for yourself. A lot of the kids, mostly girls, would say that, so they would call and schedule appointments with him, and sometimes it would just be with him, sometimes it would be with him and Ghislaine, sometimes it would be with him and a friend, or just a friend. He would take girls and like rent them out, like absolutely disgusting. Or if like he was having a big party, as he often did because he had a lot of wealthy and powerful friends, and quite frankly a pretty easy job for the amount of money he was making. Lots of time to just bum around, be a dick. And so when he would have parties, he would bring like groups of them. on his flight logs that you can look at that these people won't tell you about. You can look at names and initials and dates and find out who's been there and how many times, and that's just off the one plane. That's not even counting how many times someone flew their personal jet there, rode their personal submarine. Like, the people he hung out with, he did not work with clients who had less than $1 million. Like, that was, you're poor if you have $1 million and you're hanging out with Jeffrey Epstein. So the amount of money these people have is just baffling. So that doesn't even account for people getting there on their own. And just the people in his flight book and in his black book alone that have been there, it's a lot of celebrities, a lot of politicians, a lot of stuff like that. And it was known, like, even jokingly in the elite area, they called it Pedo Island, even though they all went there. They all thought they would never get caught. And that's why ABC was in the news this week, because they had, there was a whistleblower who went to Project Veritas, which is a company that works to expose corruption on a mass scale, and lately they've had a ton of breaking stories. You probably haven't heard about the Google whistleblower, but he pretty much confirmed that Google does have algorithms and does change and bias intentionally your search results, your first page, your if you type in the search bar, like what comes up. They have a whistleblower who now has a name and a face. His name is Zach Voorhees, and he's been going out doing interviews and stuff, talking about all of the stuff. You can literally look. There's like 400 pages of Google's internal employee documents. Google sent the FBI after this guy, tried to shut him up. It's legit. And none of these people will talk about it, because if Google goes down, if Epstein goes down, they all go down. This whole system will crash and burn. So, Project Veritas hit big again, and got and one of their news anchors is caught on camera saying that she had this whole story on Epstein and his relations with this girl named Virginia Roberts on the internet. At the time, she was Virginia Giffrey, has since gotten married, and I don't know how to say her maiden name, so we're gonna go with Virginia Roberts. And so pretty much this girl had all of this information. She had it all documented. She was in hiding for 12 years. She, in 2015, made a case against Jeffrey, or actually technically it was against, we call her Ghislaine Maxwell, but it implicated Epstein. It implicated, and I'm only going to say this name once so I don't get kicked off YouTube, it implicated Epstein, Bill Clinton, and Prince Andrew of the royal family, and I believe Epstein's lawyer, I forget his name, Dershowitz or something, and so it's implicating all of these people. This lady from ABC has had interviews with the girl. They have pictures, they have video, they have the literal evidence taken from the trial. They have Virginia Roberts' lawyer interviewing and saying, like, we're going to find out as one of the most connected pedophiles of all time. Like, this case, if it had been under the right set of judges, if it had gotten the press and publicity and the outrage it deserved, would be, like, it would take down everybody, everything. So Epstein has ties not only to those elite people, but then he also has and then Victoria's Secret and tons of other companies. Like, this is literally only his inner ring. Like, this doesn't even begin to branch out. And then he's also got close connections to the Bronfman family. and they're so he has connections to the father, I guess we'll say, and the father is was the Seagrams. I don't remember if he's dead or not. I think he's dead. But he had a lot of money, owned Seagrams at a time, and Epstein was like really good friends with him. They did a lot of shady stuff together, and then, what did his kids do? His two, or at least one of his daughters, I'm pretty sure two of his daughters, or his daughter and his niece, but Claire Bronfman for sure, his daughter, is tied to NXIVM. And that's actually a V. That's how they spell it. So he's got his circle, and that's just the elites. That's not even branching out to the hundreds and thousands. Okay. Yeah, hundreds and thousands easily of people that they abuse. And so, well, his, as far as we know, is a lot with children. They also have this direct connection to NXIVM, which is another sex trafficking company that was disguised as a self-help group, and a lot of their top people, including Claire Bronfman, have been proven guilty on their first set of charges. The cases are still ongoing, but they traffic not only children, they traffic poor children, they take wealthy people's children and poor children and start to mind control them, get them to do both, not only just like physically, sexually, whatever they want them to do, but when they get them from a young age or even as a young adult, they'll pretty much groom them into being whatever they want them to be successful at. So they gain control over them, they give them a tool, like something that makes them unique or special or talented at something, and then they get them into these high up places, whether it's social status or scientifically or medically or something, and then they give them this skill, and then they will continue to mind control them throughout their career. And so they look at the underprivileged to take advantage of, and they look at the privileged to trick into getting blackmailed enough that as they become famous or as they become wealthy or powerful, that they have to bow down to NXIVM, or else they risk their careers, their families, their lives, stuff like that. And NXIVM actually has daycares for ridiculous amounts of money, where they do crazy stuff to the kids. They make them they speak to them in a different language every day, which like apparently confuses the crap out of kids. Like they literally make them to grow up like messed up, and like expose them to sexual things from very, very early on. They've done a ton of research into mind control, and they're masters of it. And yeah, our boy Epstein has definitely taken some notes from them, and he does a lot of the same stuff. And so that's just like a super short summary on how screwed up these kind of people are. Like, they're not just your neighborhood weirdo. They're not just, I mean, they're a guy with a fetish, but it is so much more complex and disgusting and systematic. Like, these are legitimately like giantly international organized trafficking systems that are, as we're seeing, being protected by these companies. So ABC kills the story, and then we find out that ABC kills the story. And what are all of these people talking about? They're not talking about what the story was. They're still not talking about what Epstein did. They're talking about how ABC, their higher-ups, killed the story. They're talking about how the whistleblower is to blame. Not any of these people, but the whistleblower is to blame. Or a few of them are like, well, the girl, the reporter whose story got killed should have posted it anyway. And like, yes, she should have, or should have done something. But no one is talking about what actually happened. And the crazy thing is is that a couple months ago, after Epstein's death or arrest, right around that time, the exact case that this person, the ABC person, was talking about, there's literally a court summary of it available online. It has, I don't know, it's probably like 70-ish pages. I've honestly genuinely read through most of it. And even this one case does not do justice to how twisted this human is, but it has evidence of the written notes, because he would literally schedule these girls in, message notes of when they'd call saying like, oh, should I get out of class so I can be there at 1:30, or I'll be here at this time, should I bring a friend? A lot of times the ages are literally written down, or it'll be like, this girl is 2 times 8 years old. It's got pictures of, it's not even all the pictures that ABC had, because the way she was describing it, it was even more groundbreaking than what we have today. But the fact is, today we have evidence, and we have a story, and we have connections, and we have all this information, and none of these people up here will talk about it. There's only like, maybe like 60% of the people up here that are talking about it, and we're all conspiracy theorists just because we can read a court document and know what it says. So it has excerpts of the interrogations, so the questioning going on, the what did he make you do, who else was involved, where did you go, how did you get tied into this. All of that is outlined in the questioning, in the case summary, which I'll put that link here below if any of you are still listening. And I definitely would check that out for yourself, because the fact that, I will admit they hit it. The first time I found it, it took me about 10 minutes searching on Google. So yeah, I think it came out right before his alleged suicide, because shortly after was when I was going to write an article on this, and I went back to find that resource again, and I swear it took me like an hour and a half. I had to click through all of these crazy websites to find it again. It's just a PDF that is online, but luckily now I bookmarked it, and I'll never have to look for it again until the internet erases it completely. But for now, you can go look for yourself and see a lot of the details of the story ABC was hiding. It's got a couple pictures of the girl. You can definitely tell she's underage. You can definitely tell that she's been involved with Epstein and Maxwell for several years. There's several pictures of her and our royal family friend, we'll call him. And then there's the connection to him. What's his number? 42. 42 was on the same Lolita Express flight logs that she was allegedly on. So the girl, Virginia Roberts' story matches up completely with the court case, which matches up completely with the accidental whistleblowers case, and it even aligns with the flight logs that we have separately. Those have been out for gosh knows how long. It's a very, there's tons and tons of pages, but it's so methodically kept track of that you can go through and find the things you're looking for. There's people who have made it, because it's handwritten too, like you could not forge this if you tried, but there's people who have typed it up and put it into a textual online webpage so that you can search through it a little bit easier, but it's still very time consuming, but it's there. And then lastly, Epstein has a black book, which has the name of several more celebrities and world leaders in it, and all of the story of everyone around it, all of the stories match up. There's no reason beyond a doubt that we should, even if we don't accept fully everything that's been said or take everything 100%, we should not be blowing this story off for sure. We should be researching it. We should be talking about it. We should be told about it by these people who apparently are supposed to deliver us the news and tell us what's going on. And if anything bad is happening, they'll tell us about it or whatever. But no, they literally just make up whatever they want to talk about today. And the last point, ABC, which I don't know if I mentioned, also owned by Disney, if that wasn't implied. One of their channels, or TV shows, is The View, and that show has been making headlines all week. It started making headlines because Donald Trump Jr. Was allowed on his show, on their show, it's all women, but was allowed on their show, which was crazy because usually the fake entertainment, your Comedy Central, owned by, I want to say Comcast, like all of those personalities, your daytime personalities, your every news channel except Fox News, who is definitely not innocent in all of this, but they at least have the president and his family on their show from time to time. If you notice, not a single other television show, no matter what their angle is, like, you don't see Ellen inviting Melania Trump to go dance on her show. Like, everyone in the mainstream news avoids the Trumps like the plague, and anyone associated with them, anyone who is not afraid to tell you how this actually works or the truth about anything, because as we saw in The View, I'm pretty sure Trump Jr. was on there for like 5 minutes, and he just like, he didn't even try, he just like fucked shit up. Because so from the second he is being introduced, Whoopi Goldberg is like, thinks she's all funny, and she's like, can't even say President Trump's name. She's like, the occupant, the man in the White House, his son is here, DJT. Like, she literally can't say either of their names. I'm pretty sure her head would have just started spinning or something. But she literally couldn't say their name. And so they start asking him about his dad's tweets, and he's like, no, I think it gets the message directly to the people. That's what we're about. It makes people think. Yeah, he knows, like, basically he's like, he knows what he's doing and it works for him. And then he is like joking, and he's like, honestly, he'll call me and tell me that I need to tone it down because my tweets are worse, and his totally are. He's a savage. But then they can't get him there, so they just start, like, I forget what they said, but because if the media had dirt on the man, it would be in your face by now. Like, for as much negative press as he gets, a lot of people can't explain why they don't like him, but they just don't like him. A lot of them are like, his tweets, he's not presidential, he's a threat, he's a danger, all this, like, vague stuff, but they can't tell you what it is that he's done, specifically, that you don't like. And if they can, a lot of times it's been disproven. But, so they're attacking his character. So he throws shade back at I don't know her name, but the girl who attacked him, and he's like, well, didn't you wear blackface and think it was funny? Like, we all have pasts we're not proud of and stuff. And then Whoopi comes to the rescue, and she's like, oh, she never did that. Like, I would know if she did that, blah, blah, blah. And so then Trump Jr. throws it on her, and he goes, well, didn't you make fun of that kid? Like, you have things you regret too. Like, don't you regret making fun of that kid who you said didn't get raped, this 13-year-old that got molested by an adult? She said it wasn't rape, and so it was okay. And Whoopi's like, I never said that. And then all of a sudden, Twitter and the people of the 10% and the decentralized intelligence, as we call it, all the people who go back and try to break the algorithms and find this stuff, all of a sudden, they've got a video of the girl he targeted first, wearing blackface, laughing about it on The View, with Raven Simone as the guest that day. Other people, they're just like, think it's funny. admits to it, justifies it, and then maybe an hour later, someone finds the video of Whoopi Goldberg from what looked like 100 years ago of her talking about the kid who didn't get raped, and how in the United States we have different standards, and we think 13-year-olds are ready to have relationships with significantly older adults. And they both just got blasted. And then I found that video I mentioned earlier with the kid whistleblowers of, it's a woman, I don't think she's on it anymore, didn't care to learn her name, but she basically told the kid to shut up and stop making Hollywood look bad for telling parents that they shouldn't try to get their kids into Hollywood because, and if they do, that they have to accept the risk that their kid might be abused or sex trafficked. And she basically told him to shut up. Like, I can't even imagine how many sound bites could come from that show alone of, like, people and their hypocrisy and saying all this stuff that if someone who they didn't agree with will say, said today, that there would be absolute outrage and uproar. And so that leads us to, so when the mainstream media does something wrong, they have blackface or they have connections to a sex trafficker or whatever, the mainstream media, let's give me that blue, will protect one another. We saw that with the ABC example, how no one is going behind their back and saying, oh, you still have the story, or hey, we found the story, or hey, we have enough that we can make the story. They protect one another because they're all tied into the same stuff, and if one goes down, they'll probably all go down. Then they immediately spread disinformation. So immediately, Whoopi, oh no, she would never do that. Oh no, I never said that. Like they try to cover it up as soon as they possibly can. Or with Epstein, oh, there's no way he didn't kill himself. Before the results even get back, they're saying there's no way, or no, they're saying there's no way it was a murder. He definitely took his own life and stuff. So they get ahead of the story. And then all of a sudden, when the doctor comes in with the results, the first doctor is the same doctor who was on President Kennedy's, which I don't know if you can see him back there, President Kennedy's assassination. The doctor who confirmed there was only one shooter, that guy, was put onto Epstein's case, and he said it was definitely a suicide, even though every other doctor who saw him and analyzed his bone breaks and the height of the bed versus the fall he said he had, all other evidence says that Epstein didn't kill himself. And but because the one doctor that all of these people quoted said that he did, a lot of people tend to believe the first thing that they hear, or the thing that they hear the most. And especially when all the people over here are being classified as conspiracy theorists. This kind of media is called, a lot of people call it new media, which is really old media, which goes back to the way of looking at the facts, making logical decisions, trying to keep bias out of things. Being objective, trying to go straight to the source, trying to go past all that bullshit, and we get called conspiracy theorists for that. So call it what you want, but I think there's a lot more evidence that this makes sense than that their immediate disinformation, or they go on the attack. So immediately, to kill this story on Epstein, they're like, oh, we can make this political, even though aside from, if you take this connection here out, aside from that, this whole thing is pretty freaking bipartisan. Like, there's a lot of things we don't agree on in this country, but if people taking advantage of people in general and kids and forcing them to do stuff like that, and if we can't agree on that, like, I'm freaking moving. Like, I know people joke about that all the time because they're being dramatic, but like, if this is not a bipartisan issue when you remove that man from the equation, like, and if this is the kind of stuff that they're hiding, like, there's no way that those are good people. But because they sit up there and they say that these sources are not credible, even though they try to hide them, and the more and more stuff I look into and do research on, the more of it seems to come to be proven slowly or quickly. But because these people have so much control over what you're told, what you're exposed to, what you think is funny, what you think is cool, what the new trends are, they have control over everything. So essentially, they have control over you. Yeah. But, so to the conspiracy, all I have to say about that is there is one past or current president who may or may not have an interview from a day in the early 2000s that may or may not have been the day, or a specific day, that may or may not imply that the man knows a little bit about construction, and he seemed to think that these people up here were pretty fake news. So I don't think when that man is saying fake news that it's a new concept for him. It's not because they attack him. It's not just because he's taking it personally. The man has been saying fake news in one extent or another for about 18 years. And other than that, all I have to say is